Hi, my name is Joy Bergstrom. This is my Dance 333 Origins of Jazz Dance Final Project for Fall 2021. When I signed up for this class last spring, I anticipated having somewhat of a general grasp on what would be taught in the class. I had taken dance classes for 15 years, 12 or so if you only count the years in which I learned technique, and took ballet, jazz, character, and modern throughout my career. Though I would not consider myself a jazz dancer, per se, nor a dance historian, I felt like I would have had a general grasp on most of the content we learn in this class. The first day of class pretty much immediately proved me wrong. I had been misguided in the past on the origins of jazz dance and the ways in which jazz held critical meanings for people who were not me. My dance upbringing prior to this class was overwhelmingly white. Not super surprising given the fact that I had been enrolled at a ballet school in Salt Lake City, Utah for the entirety of my previous dancer career, and I was thus taught a very white history of dance. My midterm focused on how I had been told my entire life that ballet was the basis of all dance, an idea immediately refuted by this class. Just a few months ago, when I thought of the origins of jazz dance, my mind immediately jumped to Bob Fosse, Jack Cole, and Jerome Robbins. In my prior jazz classes, we hardly discussed anyone besides these men when discussing where the movements in which our technique came from. From this class, I've learned about so many other figures who played an overall, more influential role in jazz. Further, I was told that jazz stemmed from contemporary notions of ballet. My ballet instructors, people who I consider very, very influential in my overall upbringing, tended to emphasize the importance of ballet in order for our technique in jazz to fully develop. Yet, it seems that those who truly created jazz dance, or vernacular jazz dance it may be described, did not base themselves around ballet. After the first few sessions of this class, I would not say that my world was turned upside down. I had known that Black people have been instrumental in the creation of jazz music and had a role in the types of dance I tended to associate with the pre-war era. I just not fully comprehend the scope of influence or creation. I also had a grasp on histories of exploitation, appropriation, and white supremacy. A lot of aspects of this class made sense from the beginning, despite defying or contrasting much of what I had been taught, simply because of these histories, and a basic understanding of how things have been taken and altered over time. The beginnings of this class, akin to the beginnings of jazz dance itself, centered on slavery and how the slave trade impacted movement and music. Independent of this class, I doubt I would have traced the origins of something I've partaken in for years back that far. Yet, it makes sense to trace it to this point, or even before, back to Africa. Before taking this class, whenever I thought about dance outside of the Western world, when I thought about dance prior to pretty much the 19th century, I associated it with stylized movement that is neither focused on technique nor performance. I have since come to realize, and have been realizing prior to this class, this was a rather Orientalist way to view things, likely rooted in the sphere of influence ballet and its white supremacist aspects carried in my life. Deconstructing these notions, which had been bolstered in my mind for years as I found myself surrounded by ballet supremacy, was the first thing this class did for me. My dance upbringing had been so white. We had a middle-aged woman teach us African dance. In her defense, Rosie, my instructor, did seem very knowledgeable about where the movements she taught us came from and the distinctions they made. After I understood the African roots of jazz, which also ends up incorporating movement from other cultures, a next critical step for me was understanding the role of music in jazz dance. I knew what music could do for a piece, as music and dance pretty much go hand in hand, but I did not expect to delve so deeply into jazz music alongside jazz dance. Yet, these lessons made me appreciate music to a greater extent. Another topic I did not anticipate to bridge in this class was the role of spirituality in jazz dance. Growing up, my ballet studio would put on an activity that could best be described as a work of contemporary ballet. As I mentioned before, I grew up in Utah and was thus very much not immune to religion seeping its way into things, but that was the closest I personally got to relating spirituality to movement. Thus, I found myself slightly off track, though I could not say I was completely surprised. We spent a few class periods discussing the spirituality tied to jazz dance, especially the spirituality not directly tied to my previous notions of religion and its place in dance. I feel like this moved me in such a way simply because I had never thought about religion as something so core to one's culture. I remember that one of the most notable lessons for me in this section of the class was when we kind of took apart Single Ladies by Beyonce to find its relation to church. Yet again, what I was learning made sense once I learned it, but I would have never thought to think or compartmentalize many of these aspects in such a way without the facilitation of this class. Furthermore, I have increasingly come to the realization, as previously mentioned, that much of my perception surrounding dance has been jaded by racist and Orientalist frames of influence. In a prior era, I'd have been one of those people who'd gawk and view religious occurrences that were foreign to me as spectacles rather than reverent displays of spirituality, just as we discuss people doing with Black churches. At its core, Not only has this class fundamentally altered how I view dance as a whole, but it has also changed how I perceive an entire host of things. I've been amazed at this class's ability to make me realize how entrenched racist ideas have been in my own mind as well as the minds of those around me. This realization has been coming along since I started at USC in fall of 2020, but the personal connections this class presented facilitated my progress. As I've already mentioned a few times, I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. My high school, despite being located in one of the wealthiest areas of the state, served an incredibly diverse population. The student body was minority white, yet there were most certainly gaps in what was taught in my classrooms, gaps that I didn't realize existed until I took a class focusing on the American War in Vietnam my first semester here. These gaps were, as previously noted, even more prevalent in my extracurricular dance education. Had I been taught many of the fundamentals of this class while younger and still taking studio dance classes almost every day of the week, I imagine I've garnered a more appreciative view of the moments I was quite frequently performing. I think this knowledge would have helped steer me away from the series of assumptions and biases I acquired while enrolled in ballet, as ballet can project such harmful ideas about many things. Even before this class, jazz to me was the essence of Americana. Jazz dance, in my mind, has always been the American style of dance, especially if one considered ballet to be the European style. Jazz music is also deeply American to me, and both of these seem to converge on the prevalence of jazz dance and music in the golden age of Americana. I would associate jazz with Broadway and old Hollywood movies, two things I tend to be absolutely charmed by. At the conclusion of this class, I've come to view jazz as something fundamentally American. Born in the United States from aspect of sound and movement from different cultures, jazz stemmed from racism and slavery, two foundations of the United States. It was then taken and manipulated by those who did not create it, which in my mind is a pillar of the American identity. Jazz represents America for its good and its bad.